Hi, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to our community call of March 2023. Here is our team. Not too much has changed. I think this may be the wrong PowerPoint. Give me 1 second. I'm going to have to switch this. This is the right one. Okay, here we go. This is the right one. Okay, not too much has changed on our team and our core maintainers. But as always, the community call is for you guys, not for us. It's to allow you guys to get updates on topics we might not cover in our own calls and content. We have this every month, so we'll have pretty good updates, pretty recent updates. Please be active in the Q&A. And we always are more casual here with our community, so please talk to us directly if you'd like. So use the chat. We have our team in chat answering questions, but you can also raise your hand to ask questions, and we have a Q&A at the end if you want to talk directly to us more on in-depth stuff. All right, Alex?
Okay, so we have 0.16 that I think we will get reasonably close to shipping on April 1. There's a few things here that are interesting. The first one is the CIDR math functions. This is one of our most requested features. So Joshua was able to get that done, which is awesome. So if you've seen CIDR math functions basically in any language, we really just borrowed from what we saw out there. I think we most closely modeled this after some C# CIDR math libraries. But please try those out and let us know how they're working for you. Bicep public registry completions. I think this shipped in a previous release in experimental, but now I think it's going to be available to everyone. So we're just polishing this up, and this is a really nice way to explore what's in the registry and make it really easy to consume them, link to documentation, all those sorts of good things. And we're continuing to add to the registry. We're working really closely with the Caramel team right now to try to get their content into the registry. And there's other contributions coming down the pipeline. So just trying to make this easier and easier to consume and for people to get more and more value out of it. Number 3, so obviously we've talked about the Bicep parameters files a few times, and we're going to talk about them more today. But what's really nice in the 0.16 release is we're really enabling you to test this for the first time. Technically, there was a way to test this earlier, but it was kind of a pain. You had to create your own build of the extension. But now you can opt in. So in Bicep config, there's an experimental feature enum or value for Bicep parameters. So if you enable that in Bicep config, that's all you need to do to get started with authoring. You can just have a file with the .bicep param extension. And then you'll be able to get all the Bicep language service support for that. If you try it on 4.1 or whenever this actually gets released, you will have to manually transpile. So if you remember the early days of Bicep, you had to create your own ARM templates yourself and then deploy them. That's kind of the state that we're in just for a little bit for Bicep params files. So we have a dedicated Bicep builds params command that's I think technically already shipped, but will be also in the next release. But AZ CLI support actually will be there in their next release. So on April 4th, when they ship, you'll be able to just use the Bicep param directly. You won't have to do the manual transpiling. So this should be really easy to consume, particularly starting on 4.4. So try that out. We'll talk about future releases in a second. This should be fully available soon, including with PowerShell support. So excited to see how people kind of gravitate to this new capability. And we have some, I think, really interesting features that we're going to be adding to it shortly after the initial release. For future releases, I don't think anything groundbreaking is going to be shipping in ODOT 17, but I'm sure, as always, there will be some nice quality of life improvements. Just not exactly sure what they're going to be. For ODOT 18, so at the start of June, the Bicep parameters file should be done. You shouldn't have to opt in. It should just be easy to use. I squeezed this in July 1st. I think we'll have the first preview of the graph provider. So we shipped the Kubernetes provider last month. We're on a good engineering kind of execution path for the graph provider right now. So hoping July, sometime in the summer for that. And I think we're quite confident that that's going to be really widely adopted. So excited to see what people do with that. What I forgot to update is custom types will ship somewhere between 5.1 and 7.1. So there's been a lot of work kind of polishing that capability, and a lot of you have already tried it, which is awesome. So that should kind of get out of preview. We're just figuring out some final points of friction that we need to resolve before we can ship that. We'll talk more about this in future community calls, but there's kind of an implicit change that we need to do to get you into custom types. And there could be unpredictable results. We'll talk a lot more about that and what that means and how to be safe in adopting that. But it's an important step along the way of making the templates much safer and much more usable. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in future releases. Everything else, ODOT Star and 1.0, nothing material changed there. Although, if you'll notice, the 1.0 list is getting smaller. So these things from 1.0 that have been perpetually on the right side of the screen are moving to the left side of the screen, which means we're actually getting to them and reaching something close to a 1.0 milestone, which, as we've discussed many times, is more of a PR exercise than anything else, but will be exciting nonetheless. So excited to keep chipping away at that. So the other thing I wanted to talk about today is our high level. I should have written this out. So this is a little more inside baseball. So you'll see GA, which is not our normal general availability GA acronym. You've probably seen, through the grapevine that we use elements in the periodic table for our 6-month planning cycles. So this next cycle, which starts on April 1st, is gallium. So that's what the GA is a reference to. I wanted to share with you all kind of what our general high-level plans are for the next 6 months. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but just give you an indication of what are our kind of big focus areas. And I thought it would be good to share it with you all. So we're not just talking about Bicep, but we're talking about the whole kind of deployments engineering team and what we're focused on. The first one is quality and paper cuts. So we've been, I think, the pendulum swings back and forth on feature development and kind of quality and stability. I think we were on the feature side of the pendulum for a decent amount of time, shipping new things for Bicep, etc. And now the pendulum is kind of swinging back again to quality fixes. So I think this semester will be less new features, but a lot of things that we just haven't been able to prioritize for one reason or another. And the reason usually is that they are big and scary and uncomfortable changes to make, and we could accidentally ship a Seb 1 if we're not careful. So that's why it's easy to kind of punt some of these things. But we really want to focus on them this semester, and hopefully you guys can keep us accountable by sharing it with you all. So the quality and paper cuts, some of the big ones are to fix the pre-flight and what if short circuiting. So there's one of those epic issues in the what if repo. It's 157, and if you know a GitHub issue number, you know it's bad. So 157 is where the what if will not show you all the things that it's going to do. Basically, if you use modules in, frankly, a normal way, it kind of breaks pre-flight, which is what we need to power what if. So it ends up you don't get all the results and you don't know that you didn't get all the results. So we are definitely going to focus on that one in particular. Another big uncomfortable one are some of these execution graph issues. So when you send us an ARM template or a Bicep file, we break it down into something that we call an execution graph, which is basically the order in which the template can deploy resources, and so that we can do as many things in parallel as possible and deploy as fast as possible. Sometimes we get the execution graph order wrong, particularly when you use like a list function or the existing keyword are the two big ones, where we might call the resource or a function too soon and it breaks the deployment. And you thought that you had the deployment in the right order and you did modules to create the thing that you need a reference to later, but there's not a good way to deal with this. So we are focusing on that one this semester, as well as condition getting called incorrectly. So if condition is false, we still evaluate the resource, which is not lovely. So we are going to get to that one this semester too. We're going to focus on increasing speed of deployments. There's one particular improvement that we're excited to do. Basically, we waste a lot of time if you have a lot of modules. So we're going to get rid of all that wasted time this semester. So it should have a meaningful improvement on the speed of deployments. The number two kind of big one is error message improvement initiatives. So there's a couple here that I'm pretty confident we're going to do. One is actually done in a lot of ways, but if you've seen what's called stringified JSON in error messages, so you see /r's or /n's in error messages, that is not great either. So we fixed that, and we're going to try to just make it easier to read error messages generally. So there's probably a few other things that we can do, but this is the big one. Number two, which I am selfishly very curious and excited about, is the ability for you all to self-report bad error messages. So everyone on this call has probably at one point or another experienced a bad error message or shared a bad error message, hoping to get it resolved. These are notoriously difficult to kind of track and get our hands around because there's all sorts of reasons you might get a bad error message and it's hard to know who's supposed to fix that. So what we want to enable is kind of a crowdsourced method of reporting bad error messages where we can create like a trigger to say, hey, if the same error message has been reported as bad 10 times, let's try to get it to the team to get it resolved. And there's varying degrees of severity that we can treat this sort of thing. So we're hoping this can help us kind of work on the problem a little bit more. So we'll see where it goes. And then deployment stacks public preview, there's not a ton to share here other than it's happening. So we're reaching the late stages of private preview, and we want to get public preview out as fast as possible. Stacks is going to be an interesting beast. There's a lot of little details that need to be right in order for stacks to function well. And we are sorting through them now, but we want to open this up to get more hands on it, to get more feedback and make sure that the experience is working well end to end. Okay, that was not a lot of bullets, but a lot of content. Any particular questions that we should cover, Stephanie, that you saw?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions in chat, so I'm just gonna list them off to you.
Okay.
How's the progress on custom providers, for example, for our own APIs?
Oh, to be able to ship your own like custom providers other than the ones that Microsoft is doing? I'm just going
I
to
think
assume.
so. Jan Henrik, is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Yes.
There's no material update as of now. It's not committed work. So until we say otherwise, there's no plan to do it. I think as extensibility gets a little more popular, it's something that we can revisit, but as of now, nothing.
Okay. I think there's a question about custom types. Johnny, you answered it. Taylor, does this answer your question?
We'll assume yes, I think, for now.
Yes. Okay, perfect. About the Bicep parameter release, will there be conversion for larger JSON I'm using for each environment, including VNet and subnet param on dev prod stage file? Not quite sure this question.
I think the question is, if I have a parameters file written in JSON, is there going to be like a decompile equivalent to get me a Bicep param file?
Yeah, there should be a decompile.
Thanks, Mohammed. And I think a few people were asking about the build and decompile APIs, as well as export from Portal.
Yeah, that I've somehow dropped from the list as well. That wasn't intentional. So as of now, we're still expecting to ship that. We're working through some of the details with the Portal team on what exactly that needs to look like. Don't have an ETA we can share with confidence, but we are expecting to do it.
There's a question. Does item 1 bullet 3 include something like modifying IP groups attached to firewalls, or is that an RP issue?
Item 1 bullet 3 is increased speed of deployments. Maybe bullet 2, the execution graph issues. Let's take that one
no,
offline.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, no, it's speed of deployments. That they ran so long that they were unusable.
Oh, I see. Got it. No, it won't affect that. So if it's a particular resource provider is taking a long time, it's going to continue to take a long time.
Yeah. Okay. Are these messages inclusive of pointing out which line of a template is responsible for failed deployment?
That one is on our list. We would like to do a better job of giving you error locations. We may be able to squeeze that into Gallium, but it hasn't been committed as of yet.
Someone asked, is it just for Bicep or ARM provider error messages?
It'll be both.
There was one, let's see. Will extension of an extension resource be included in O.17 release?
Well, extension.
Something.
I responded to this one.
Okay.
Yes, that particular fix is going to be in the 0.16 release.
Okay, cool. Someone's asking any breaking change that we should be careful before we upgrade Bicep on production.
No. In general, if there's a breaking change that we are aware of, you'll see us be pretty clear about it and careful about it. It is always possible an accidental breaking change shipped, which is always not our intention. But anytime you upgrade any software, you should assume there's a breaking change unless proven otherwise, would be my suggestion.
And I guess Anthony or David, do you want to go into details on what you're doing to make the deployments faster?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things we noticed is that with Bicep, we've made it very easy to nest deployments inside each other. So we're seeing a lot of very complex structure of deployments going through, and we've basically identified some places where there's inefficiencies in the detecting the completion of a nested deployment and the starting of the next nested deployment. So basically cutting down the amount of time we're waiting between those things happening. So I think the main speed up benefit is probably going to be if you have a lot of nesting going on in a lot of use of modules in your Bicep files.
Is it clear if something is slow, whether it's an ARM provider problem or a Bicep problem?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously have a mix of the two. There are cases where, as far as the deployment engine is concerned, we're being as fast as we can, but a put to a certain provider is taking a long time. This isn't going to address any of that. This is all about just dealing with inefficiencies in the deployment engine itself. So, I mean, you're right. There are two things that we need to address in the long run. There's speeding up what we do, and there's talking to the teams that manage these different resource providers and seeing if they can speed some of the things they do up.
Sure.
So basically, this is our first step in trying to make the deployments a little faster.
I guess where I'm coming from is just a if things are slow, is there something that we can see as customers that tell us it's it's not you, it's them, or I guess how can we how's the best way to report something that seems to be slow? Just throw it out there and we can decide if it's the provider or not, or is there something that this would surface that would tell us looks like the provider's running slowly?
If you're familiar with the deployment operations, either the API response or the view in the portal, that should give you a breakdown of like how long each resource took to deploy. So I think if you're seeing, for example, you deploy a Microsoft Web Sites resource and it takes a minute to deploy, you should see a deployment operation for that resource take, and it should have a time associated with it.
Sure. So things that have traditionally always taken forever, like Data Explorer, they're still just going to take forever. This is more about the interval between when one deployment starts and ends.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's definitely not a catch-all for we're going to speed up every deployment, but it's a fairly significant speed up for certain scenarios.
Great. Thanks.
Another question, a little controversial, we probably don't know the answer to this, but Alex, with so many layoffs being recently announced across Microsoft, is there a risk that in future layoffs is in your team, or is your team still growing?
That risk is always there. No one should ever try to predict what's going to happen in that regard. I think that we feel pretty confident that nothing's going to affect us too negatively at this point, but no one knows. And yeah, who knows what could happen with the economy, and that will affect the decisions that Microsoft as an organization makes. So anything can happen.
Thanks, Alex. Any idea about being able to pass resources as params and outputs? Is that on the roadmap in the foreseeable future?
Yes, that would have been a good one to call out here. I think we will get that done in Gallium.
Any plans to allow us to iterate through files in a folder and then pass these as an iteration object to a resource?
No plans for that one. If it continues to get more upvotes, we can revisit it.
Is it possible to output variables to the std out, or can it be printed out to a console?
That's a good one. Outputs get evaluated at the very end of the deployment. So the reason we can't do it today is because we literally don't know them at that point. We could, I think, revisit that. I think there are options, but there's no way to do it today, and no commitment that that's going to change in the future. But it is an interesting one.
Okay, and our last one, would Bicep params replace the need to transform a JSON in the pipeline, or does it have a different use case? Would it also fundamentally change loading JSON as a variable?
If I understand the question, I think it will depend. It depends on what transformations you're doing in the JSON. To start out, in the initial release of Bicep params, it will be functionally very similar to JSON. There's a couple things that may limit the need to do these transforms. One is loading environment variables, which I'm 95% sure will be in the first release. And so there was really no ability to be dynamic with Bicep parameter or JSON parameters. This will open up a lot of different options. The other one is that we're going to introduce some kind of basic expression support, string manipulation, and other things of that nature to the Bicep parameters file. So that may open up a lot of doors as well. So kind of a wait and see on that one.
Okay, cool. I think we got, oh, Michael, you have your hand up? I'm not sure if you're talking or muted, or if it was a mistake. Okay, cool. That was a lot of questions, so let's move on. Keep putting them in chat. We really like being able to talk to you guys directly and answer your questions. All right, Mohammed, did you want to share your screen? Or
Yes,
just talk?
I'm going to share my
cool.
screen. Just a quick demo.
Okay.
Let me know when you guys can see my screen. All right. So here we have a really simple Bicep template for a storage account. And originally what you would do is you would create a params JSON file like this. And you would utilize this and deploy this with the your template. So as you know, we've been talking about it. We introduced the Bicep params, so parameters that you can write using the Bicep syntax. For that, with this release, you'll be able to use it. And all you need to do is you need to create a bicep config.json with the params file enabled. And that's it. And then you can create a new file. Give me 1 second. And you can select a language. So in the language here, it would show you Bicep parameters, but it would say experimental next to it because it's still not the first release yet. So pick that and just save it for now.
Mohammed, can you, when you get back to VS Code, zoom in a couple of times?
Yes, I can. So for now. Okay, that's a bit good. Is that good? Or is it a bit more?
Looks good to me.
Okay. Yeah, so as you created, the benefit of Bicep params is that you can get type checking and auto-completion. But to do that, you need to point it to a Bicep file so it knows which parameters you would need in this file. So you just use the using declaration and it will point it to this Bicep file. And it's going to start telling you that you need these parameters. So we're going to just quickly add these parameters that we need. So I need to calculation. And then I guess the parameters for, as you can see, we're getting all these autocomplete kind. This is that storage return. Those incorrectly spelled. And then we have SKU name, and then it's going to even give you completions for this. So that's, as you can see, how fast it was to author this file, and like you don't have to worry about the quotations and stuff. That's the benefit of Bicep params. Now, before this, you would have, in order to deploy this, what you would have to do is you'd have to take this file and convert it into the JSON param file, and then deploy the JSON param file with the Bicep file. And that's a long process because you have to like basically compile this down to JSON and then deploy. But with this next AZ CLI release, we would have support to deploy this directly with the Bicep template. So I'll show you how that is done. So you do AZ deployment group create, you put your group, and after putting your template, you can put your param file. So just like normally you would put param JSON or inline parameters, you put a Bicep param file here. So Bicep param, right? And then you just press, and one thing to note here is for now, it's we have limited in a sense that you can only provide the Bicep parameters file, so you won't be able to provide the inline parameters or other JSON file because Bicep parameter file has all the parameters you need. We might add like few parameter overriding in the future if there's a demand for it, but for now it's just one parameter file that you can provide with this. And yeah, you'll press enter. And then it's going to start the deployment. Yeah, just while this is deploying. Yeah, so with this next month's April 4th is when the AZ CLI's upcoming release is. So you should be able to just enable the params in the config and be able to see all this with the latest Bicep release as well. So you should be able to just do all the deployment with that. And we're also working on the Azure PowerShell support as well. Yep, and as you can see, it got deployed. Yep, I think that's it. Let's see if there's any questions. Go ahead.
Thanks. Well, just one small question, let me see if I am getting this right. This is supposed to be a replacement for the JSON file we are working with right now, or this is just like an alternative? What is the idea here?
It's basically an enhancement, just like you have for ARM template, you have Bicep files. It makes it easier for you to author templates. It's just like that. For params, ARM parameters, you have Bicep parameters.
Cool. So the idea is that we can pick any one of them, and Bicep will receive it without a problem.
Yes, you would be able to use both. Even if you want to use the older one, that's fine. But yeah, the point of the newer one is it's easier for you to author.
Okay, thanks, Mohammed.
There are several questions in chat. I'm not sure if Anthony, you wanted to answer some of them, or I could also call them out right now, but there's a good amount of them.
Sure, I'm happy to. If you want to read them out, Stephanie, I can answer some of them.
How will Bicep param files work with modules, or would you create it after you create the full main.bicep?
With modules, are we talking about the module registry or template specs specifically, or are we talking about just like modularized Bicep files on the local file system?
The Bicep files on the system, on your local system. So I was hoping like you wouldn't need to put all of the parameters in the main, because you can just pick them up from the modules instead. So it makes your main file a lot smaller.
Got you. So you're wondering, like, is there a way that rather than having to thread the parameters down through every file, you can just inherit them from the top level?
Yeah, so from the parameters file, just you pass that into your main, and then it pushes it all the way down to the file, your module files.
Yeah, that's not something we had planned, but that's definitely an interesting idea. If you're able to capture that in the GitHub issue, I think it'd be useful for us to think about that, because I think that is one thing that can be quite cumbersome. Just being forced to pass your parameters down through every set of nested modules that you're using.
Will do. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Will the Bicep param file be able to resolve things like subscription ID ++?
Not today. We've been kind of internally discussing this idea of having a kind of extending parameters files to represent a deployment and kind of capturing all of the kind of extra information, such as the scope, the resource group that you're deploying to. But that's something that we're still designing at the moment. I think if we get to that point, then it's possible that we'll be able to reference, for example, like the scope that you're in. But as of the first release, no, there's no way to actually refer to any environment details.
Is there a way to import a Bicep parameter in PowerShell the same way as we can read a JSON file?
There is not, and this is something that I think we're interested in hearing more about, the sort of scenarios that people are trying to accomplish. Because I think one thing that's very easy with JSON being a universal language is that it's, there's a ton of tooling for reading and writing JSON. So we want to make sure that this feature is going to be flexible enough such that you can accomplish similar scenarios. So if anyone has a scenario, a scenario like that they're trying to accomplish, where, for example, you're fetching dynamic values in your CI pipeline and wanting to pass them into the parameters file, then it would be good to get some kind of more concrete write-ups for some of those scenarios, just to make sure that we're thinking about them all.
Okay, and last one, what happens when we want to pass a secret to the deployment in a parameters file?
Yeah, that's another, I think that's a similar type of scenario where, you know, your CI pipeline may have access to some secrets that you need to pass down. So one of the features we're thinking about is giving the ability to read and write, utilize environmental variables in your params file. And then another feature that I think we're not going to be supporting for the first release, but we will need to support is the ability to read from Key Vault as well.
And we have a hand up. Ryan?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you once again for the community call. It's always appreciated from us all in the community. It looks really, really good what's coming forward, and everything I've heard sounds really great. Just wanted to make that feedback verbal.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Bunny?
Just to follow on from the great answer about potentially reading secrets from the Key Vault secrets from the params file, the use case that we have is that it's a bit of a chicken and egg. You need the Key Vault to be created first before you can write the secret to the Key Vault to then be pulled down in a module. So as part of what we have a prereqs module that has a load of modules I've written, including one that can create secrets en masse. So we pass a secret into the module. So when it creates the Key Vault, it then writes the secrets, and we can then use those further on as Key Vault references. So we need to be able to pass that secret to the deployment in the first instance. So we couldn't do it later on by just pulling down a secret in the module, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so the two deployments you're describing there, the kind of like bootstrap deployment and then the deployment where you're actually using the secret, do these two deployments have the same sort of life cycle? Like, are you always deploying one and then the other, or do you want to just like put the secret, you know, do you like deploy the secret once and then refer to it separately?
Yeah, we do it once. So in our pipeline, we just have a parameter of the Boolean that I pass through, which is deploy prereqs. And if it's true, it then runs that that deployment in that module. Otherwise, it just cracks on and assumes that secret's already in place.
Okay. And where do you originally get the secret from? Is it just something that's generated by some script you have in your pipeline?
It comes from a secure variable in a variable group.
Okay. So yeah, in that case, I mean, I think if we have the capability to read environmental variables in the params when we generate the params file, then that feels like an option. You could pass it as a secure parameter, or read it as a secure environmental variable. And then you would have the option to either save it to the Key Vault and then read it back from the Key Vault, or just use it directly as a secure value.
Yeah, I think that'd be really useful. Worth considering. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks, Mohammed, for the update. Thanks for answering the questions. Anthony? Let's see. Engin, did you want to talk about VSCode generate params file?
Sure. I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, cool.
Super quick. Here it is. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the improved generate parameters experience. And let's step back. By the way, my name is Engin Polat, and I'm the happiest software engineer in Microsoft. So let's step back to talk about the current experience first, and then I'm going to talk about the proposal of the new and improved experience. So to generate parameters file out of a Bicep, module or Bicep file, there are two main ways to do that. The first one is to use the Azure CLI, Azure Bicep CLI, the Bicep CLI basically. So we can call this generate params subcommand by giving the Bicep file as the parameter, and then it will create this parameters.json file for us. The other way, actually there are multiple ways in this other way, is using the VSCode extension. So you can right click on a Bicep file or a tab, or like you can use the command palette, and you can call this generate params file menu, and then it will generate the same file for you. So this parameter.json file will have the parameters that exist or defined in the Bicep file that that doesn't have default values, right? So with this Bicep param file, new Bicep param file, and the new syntax of the Bicep param file, the proposal is to keep this existing experience as is and add more feature to the generate params functionality. So it's not a breaking change, but more of an addition. So Bicep CLI generate params subcommand will still accept the Bicep file as a parameter, but also accept output file format. And we can provide JSON or Bicep param as the value of to this argument. If it doesn't provide it, then it will fall back as JSON and continue working just like it's working right now, right? But if you provide Bicep param as a value, then it will generate a Bicep param with the new syntax. The other approach to generate the Bicep param is using the VSCode extension. And when you right click on a Bicep file, or use the command palette and pick the generate params file menu, it will basically ask you the format. And if you pick Bicep param, again, it will generate the same Bicep param. So when you use generate params command with the Bicep param output file format, or generate params file VSCode extension with this new with this generate params file menu, and pick the Bicep param, it will create the Bicep param file. And so this, and me and my team will be in the community call. I mean, we're going to stay in the call. And if you have any questions, comments, feedbacks, we'd like to get them and address them. Thank you, and back to you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Engin. Okay, let me share my screen again.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, I think we have a question. Ryan?
So just the chat that's going on about the file extension. I think the reason why personally making a different file extension makes sense is that you get the ability to be able to segregate much easier. So whilst Jan said in the chat that Bicep, just keeping with .bicep would be fine, because then you have template.parameters.bicep instead of .json. I think one of the big problems that we had with ARM templates was that you just had all these unnecessary .parameters .json files, when it could have been a .arm arm as a extension, and then an ARM parameters extension. So it'd be two different files, file types that you build and test against differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally it does have to be a different file extension, because the rules are different. They mean different things and they work differently. So it should, I mean, I'm sure it can be the same, but it should be different from a design standpoint. But if anyone has a good idea of what it should be besides Bicep param, we will definitely take suggestions.
As I said in the chat, I think it makes sense to use Bicep param because it's it's very explicit what it is in that extension. You know what it is. Searchability is going to be critical for this going forward. You're not going to find anything else on the internet that's got Bicep Param as a file extension other than for another language that comes out that's Bicep, which I don't think is going to happen. Could be proven wrong, but time will tell, right?
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Oh, Richard's made a good point. We've got hand for param name.
Yeah, we could get really cheeky with it if we wanted to.
Definitely, maybe do a form. That might be a good idea. And we come back to the next call, and you can give us the results from it.
Yeah, I do want. I enjoy the dad joke ness of the project overall, but I think there is a risk of getting too ridiculous. So I think that it's worth keeping that in mind as we make a decision. And want to avoid getting into a Bodie McBoatface conundrum if you saw that meme.
Yeah.
Right. Hope that answers your question. Move on to the requested updates from the GitHub issue. Alex, do you want to take over?
Yeah, so the first one I think we gave an update on, so hopefully July we'll have this in some sort of preview. Custom types plan, we talked about that a little bit. I think we owe you all a little bit more detail on exactly what is going to ship in the first release. But I think June is another, probably earlier ETA for that one. What if with nested module resources? We talked about that one as well. So we're gonna do our best to either avoid short circuiting entirely, so that this is no longer a problem, period, or as a fallback to at least let you know when this happened, which we don't do today. We're hoping to avoid that, but at the very least, we would like to enable that. Private registry completions for modules. So we're shipping public registry completions with this release. We'd like to do private completions as well. We have a dependency on the ACR team to light up some APIs that will make this kind of scalable. We don't want to invent something that's specific to Bicep and then use the more generic OCI or ACR based implementation. So this is really just, we have a dependency on them and it's not clear exactly when that's going to get done. So we can't share an ETA with confidence at this point on number 4. Number 5, deployments targeting mixed scopes. So today you have to, let's say you want to deploy a resource group and stuff in that resource group, which is a pretty common case, obviously. You need at least 2 files for that. And wouldn't it be nice if you just needed 1 file for that? There's no committed work on this one at this moment, but I think it's something that we're paying attention to. So what I expect to happen is that this semester we fix a lot of paper cuts and bugs and things of that nature, like we talked about. And then in the following, we might be able to get to some of these more grander Bicep features, if you want to think about it that way. And one of these big ones is modules really are a means to an end today, in that we took advantage of how template deployments worked to make modules kind of work as is and not have to make a bunch of runtime changes and allow you to have the functionality that exists in Bicep today. But it would be much more ideal if it was, modules were just a code construct, not a deployment construct. So you don't have to think about nested deployments at all. You shouldn't have to, but that's a big change. So something that we're interested in, but no material updates on number 5. Number 6, are there any plans to make it so modules can be hosted within DevOps artifacts? I don't know enough about DevOps artifacts. Is it a registry? Like, is there a container registry or an OCI compliant registry in DevOps artifacts? Like GitHub has GitHub registry that I believe is OCI compliant, so you can put container images there and whatnot. If the answer is yes to that question, then I think we will get there eventually, but nothing committed on that right now. So we'd like to light it up so that basically you can push and pull modules from any OCI compliant registry. So that's at least things like the GitHub registry, Artifactory. There's a whole bunch of other ones. So we'd like to enable that. But if DevOps Artifacts is not that, which from the chat it's looking that way, that's another can of worms. I'd be hard pressed to see us getting to that anytime soon if it's not OCI compliant. Anything else on the requested updates?
Don't think so. Just looking through all of these questions. But now it is time for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please raise your hands and you can ask us directly if we missed anything as well in chat.
Nikolai, are you asking if module completions would work with modules stored in the GitHub registry or just in a repo? Yeah, if it's registry, then what will likely happen, I think, is completions for registries will be an ACR-based implementation, as in we'll call an ACR API and not a generic container API, as I understand it. So that functionality would be locked into ACR-based registries if that's how it ends up being implemented until there's some more generic alternative. The unfortunate part, and I'm speaking a little bit outside of what I understand, but I don't think there's a great generic kind of APIs for listing these sorts of details from these registries in kind of an efficient way to power something like completions. And that's ultimately what we need to build a generic solution. We don't want to build something like that. Our assumption would be something like that would be eventually needed in the registry community for Helm charts or whatever. But maybe if push comes to shove, it's a contribution we can make back to the OCI specification and something that we can think about a little bit more.
There's a question in chat. Is there any update on being able to use scope tokens to authenticate to Azure container registries containing Bicep files?
I don't know of any update to that one. So being able to use a token instead of AAD authentication, Jan? Yeah, I don't think we have any updates to that. So if that's something that is getting in the way in a material way, please upvote that issue. I'll try to find it. The Copilot GPT-ification of the entire universe is an interesting topic. I think there needs to be more training that needs to be happening against Bicep files specifically, as I understand it. And there's a lot that I don't understand about all this stuff. It's basically the way it's working today is basically just regurgitating the code that you've all contributed and we've all contributed to GitHub. It doesn't really understand what it's doing yet. So that's something that we would need to I don't even know what the training process for something like that is, but I think you need to kind of point the laser at Bicep, the GPT laser at Bicep a little bit more, and then the results will be better. Nothing major to share on that just yet.
Someone asking about doc block support?
We don't have anything like that today. I think the PS Rule project does some of this, where you can annotate your Bicep files in a specific way, and PS Rule kind of understands that, but I don't have personal experience using that. And I don't know if anyone here from the PS Rule project is here today.
Right. I think that's it on questions. Does anyone else have any other questions they want to ask us directly? Ryan?
So just to follow on from Hassan's query about useful to have a community Discord Slack, this is something that I've had ongoing for a number of years. That is the rest of your Slack and Discord. Now, if we could get some of your team to be a bit more active in there, that would be brilliant. What we've seen from the PowerShell world, and Joel Bennett, who runs the PowerShell Slack and Discord, is also on this call. I've seen more text is you're likely to less get time from the team, but people in the community that are willing to help. So his ask is, or their ask is a good ask. I think it's something that, from a wider stance, not just from an ARM and Bicep perspective, but just wider across Azure, which of the communities would you recommend people reach out to for questions? Because obviously PowerShell, as the docs for PowerShell have got links to the PowerShell Slack and Discord. .NET has got that for C# as well, for the C# Discord. So something probably above your team, but a wider Azure question that needs to be kind of brought up.
Yeah, that's fair. Discord is one of those things I don't understand well enough at this point. But I think you're spot on, Ryan, that it would be good if there was more of a Microsoft strategy for how we want to approach these things. I'm sure it's been discussed to death already, but maybe we can try to find some answers of what the thinking is at this point. There's a question about password generation. Our desire on this one has always been for the Key Vault team to have some sort of list API or something for generating a password. We don't really want to be in the business of password generation, to be very frank. And the Key Vault team, that's their domain expertise, and they will do things in the right, safe, secure way. So we can always pass along the ask, but it's very unlikely that we're going to create something on our end.
I think that's it. Any other questions or comments you guys like to share? Otherwise, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate all of you guys showing up and asking all your questions and being really active here. We genuinely appreciate it. So thank you all, and hopefully I'll see you all next month. Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.